Hello everybody, Maven here, and you ever theory craft a build and it just doesn't work out because it's missing something, but then one day Bungie finally blesses you with what you need to complete that build? Well, this is one of those times. So if you are a longtime viewer of the channel, you might remember that at the beginning of Season of the Wish, I did a Severance Enclosure build video, because at that time Severance Enclosure got buffed and it was insane. I said it then, and I'll say it again, Severance Enclosure is the best Solar Titan exotic. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I even did a video comparing all the Solar Titan exotics. I tried Loreley Splendor, I tried Synthoceps, I tried Precious Cars, everything you name it, I tried it, and in my opinion, nothing tops the Severance Enclosure. It just wipes entire groups of ads in one bonk, and nothing else does that. And just in case you're a noob here and don't know what Severance Enclosure does, it basically just makes your powered melee final blows create explosions, and if enemies die to those explosions, they create more explosions, and it keeps chaining until nothing dies. So it's basically necrotic grips, but for Titan. So in that original Severance build video, I tested out every single Titan melee ability on every subclass to determine what was the best thing to pair with the Severance Enclosure. And before I started my testing, I was almost positive that Strand Titan would be the best, because Banner of War is just too good to pass up, especially back then before the nerfs. But to my surprise, Strand ended up being one of the worst things for Severance Enclosure due to ability uptime. Void had Offensive Bulwark, Arc had Knockout, Solar had Baby Hammer and Roaring Flames, and Strand had nothing, and that was obviously problematic. But today we are bringing this build back, and I'm happy to say we're finally able to use it on Strand thanks to a handy dandy little weapon called the Aberrant Action. You know it, you love it, you crafted it, you probably have it equipped as we speak. And as you know, rocket sidearms are the most OP archetype in PvE right now. Ever since their conception in Warlord's Ruin, they are by far the most used weapons in PvE, and that's not changing anytime soon. They just do a ridiculous amount of damage and make all other primaries and specials look like a joke. And the Aberrant Action just so happens to get pugilist and demolitionist in separate columns, so we just get a ton of ability energy for final blows, and on top of that we can enhance these perks to get even more. Now, I thought long and hard about which build could take the best advantage of having this insane weapon to greatly boost its grenade and melee regen. It wasn't going to be Hunter, because you already have Gambler's Dodge to cheese your melee regen, and it likely wasn't going to be Warlock, because all of Warlock's melee abilities kind of suck except for Lightning Surge, so I could potentially see experimenting with the Aberrant Action roll on Prismatic Warlock in the future. Now, as for Titan, it wasn't going to be Solar, because you already have infinite bonk charges. It wasn't going to be Void, because you likely want a Void weapon for volatile rounds. It wasn't going to be Arc, because you'd likely want a Volt Shot weapon for subclass synergy. Stasis is fine, but honestly. And Prismatic is fine too, because it has Frenzied Blade, but its nades aren't really too much worth spamming. And the problem is that it doesn't have Grapple or Banner of War, and Strand does. And not only is Grapple by far my favorite grenade ability in the game, but it's the only grenade ability in the game that also counts as a powered melee, meaning it also procs Severance Enclosure, so more synergy there, and it also gets boosted by Banner of War. It's a no-brainer. So it's safe to say that out of everything in the game, Strand Titan was the one that wanted this Aberrant Action roll the most. So it was finally time to bring the Severance Enclosure build off the bench and give it a try on Strand. And I'm so glad I did, because this is my new main Titan build. And I'm not just saying that for video exaggeration. No joke, before today, my main Titan build was Strand Armamentarium, because as a Strand Hunter main through and through, I love Widow Silk and I can't live without 2 grapple charges. I love the movement, it's basically my Icarus dash. So on Titan, I throw an Armamentarium, I get 2 grapples, and it's basically like I have Widow Silk. So it's really nice for movement, and I'm definitely a movement-oriented player. But let me tell you, no more, Severance Enclosure is the way to go. Now, yes, you can throw Synthoceps or Worm God Caress on Strand Titan, and that's going to shine for like boss encounters and the toughest of the toughest content. But when it comes to something laid back like a raid, dungeon, seasonal content, or anything else chill, Severance Enclosure all the way, and I'll show you why. Now, that was probably the longest Destiny intro in all of YouTube history, but anyways, let's break it down. Hope you enjoy. Oh yeah, one last thing. I know my audio sounds kind of rough. It's something that I've been trying to fix for like the past week. It's hard to figure out. But anyways, onto the video. So we're gonna run through Breakneck here with Severance Enclosure, only trash clearing with Frenzied Blade. And as you can see, we wipe out the entire vicinity with just one melee. It's pretty ridiculous. And also note that only 2 Frenzied Blades later, we already have Banner of War ×4 to give us insane healing. And if anything survives the Severance Enclosure, they get booped upward so they can't fight you, just furthering your survivability. And the Severance Explosion does go through walls, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it does have about a 15-meter radius, so it's very generous. But now moving on to another Breakneck run through. This is without Severance. You could be using Synthos, Worm God, anything, and as you can see, we don't get that insane ad clear, meaning we're not going to proc Banner of War as quickly. These other exotics will help you shred majors, but you gotta remember there's a reason why Strand Titan is no longer the meta. And that's because Banner of War received a big nerf. Not only is its timer reduced by 20%, but the multiplicative interaction with Synthoceps and Worm God Caress got significantly reduced, so you can't obliterate bosses as easily as before. And another shadow change I couldn't find evidence of, but I'm pretty sure it exists, so take this with a grain of salt, but I think Banner of War also takes more kills to proc. Correct me if I'm wrong. So what I'm trying to say is that Strand Titan isn't strictly about raw damage output anymore unless you're doing some sweaty speedrun. If you really want to use it to the fullest, ad clear, in my opinion, is the most important thing. Strand Titan is all about being a tank and surviving. And Severance Enclosure is going to make it the easiest to survive just from the sheer ad clear and the rate at which you're proccing Banner of War compared to the other builds. And this Aberrant Action is its enabler, giving us the means to spam these abilities and create more Severance explosions. And now it's about time we break down the build. Starting with our weapons, I typically lately use the Envious Bait Edge Transit, but since we're getting more ability kills than weapon kills, I went with an auto-loading Explosive Light Wendigo instead. And for your kinetic, you can go with Kabastov or Monte Carlo if you're doing content with no champions, but if there are champions, you can throw in a Midnight Coup for overloads. But if there are overloads and barriers together, then you can just go with Wish Ender and a Chill Clip Typhon to deal with those. For our other aspect, we got Into the Fray, which gives you Woven Mail when you throw a Tangle, which basically ensures that we have Woven Mail at all times. But most importantly, while we have Woven Mail, our melee regen is increased, which is super nice for ability spam. For our fragments, we got Generation for more grapple spam, Fury for more melee spam, Ascent to auto-reload our weapon when we grapple, and Warding for more Woven Mail when we pick up an orb. But if you aren't a fan of warding and you feel Into the Fray enough, then you can run Propagation, and in that case you'll be able to run something like Rufus's Fury or Breach Light. And onto our mod setup. Now this is something that I would call a vanilla mod setup, where it's really nothing special. This is sort of more or less the setup I run on my Strand Hunter, which I've been maining for over a year now, and it always does the job for being able to let me spam grapples. Now the most important thing about this mod setup is just the gloves. This is the holy trinity of grapple spam mods. We've got Grenade Kickstart obviously, and then Heavy Handed and Impact Induction are strange here because, like I said, Grapple is the only grenade ability in the game that also counts as a powered melee, meaning that it can proc the melee-based mods like Heavy Handed and Impact Induction. Causing damage to the powered melee reduces your grenade cooldown, which works with your grapple punch, so it acts as a pseudo kickstart. So when we go in for these powered melee final blows, we're making orbs with Heavy Handed. We pick them up and we proc these mods on our boots like Absolution, Innervation, and Invigoration to give us back a ton of ability energy. Now if you're doing tougher content, I could see justifying taking off Invigoration in favor of Recuperation if you needed some health. Now, a combo that I often do, you might have seen me do a couple times in the background gameplay, is after I go in for a grapple punch, I immediately follow up that animation with a Barricade, which procs Powerful Attraction on the boots to pick up the orb that we just created, and also procs Outreach and Bomber to give us more ability energy back. So the combination of our class item, boot, and glove mods together makes grapple spam and melee spam super efficient. And for my helmet, I am running hands-on Solar Siphon, and I had a little bit of extra room, so I just threw on Powerful Friends. But if you can sacrifice some stats, I would recommend double hands-on and then a solar siphon. And then on my chest, I just got a couple resistances and then solar reserves. I would replace one of the resistances with melee damage resistance if you can. So it's a pretty loose mod setup. You can mess around with it here and there. And I also could see potentially messing around with the special ammo finisher setup in the future. And for our stat distribution, I would recommend 100 resilience and discipline first and foremost, while maintaining a minimum of tier 3 intellect, and then dump as much as you can into strength. And that about does it for the build. Absolute powerhouse of a build. Definitely going to be my new main build whenever I play on Titan. As you saw in the background gameplay, I used it in some solo expert lost sectors and absolutely breezed through them quickly without dying. Any content where ads are extremely meleeable, this build is going to be top tier easily. Seriously, if you've never given Severance Enclosure a try after it got buffed in Season of the Wish, you definitely got to try it out, especially on Solar and Strand Titan. Now, quick little tinfoil hat segment, but I feel that Bungie knew that Severance Enclosure was extremely good and could become problematic if the community found out about how strong it was, so they sort of somewhat nerfed it in the final shape. Here are the patch notes. The explosions now require line of sight to damage enemies. We also reduce the knockback intensity of these explosions, which will now launch enemies more consistently vertically. Now, I could just be, as the youngsters call it, coping, but I feel that this is a nerf. I feel like Severance Enclosure used to have a more wider radius before, and I also like the sound it made before. So I felt that this change was really unnecessary, and it also used to yeet enemies so much higher in the air, and now it just barely plops them up. It's still effective for survivability, but it used to plop them up a lot higher. So like I said, I feel Bungie knew how good the Severance Enclosure was, so they had to do something about it before everyone found out about it. It's really that good. You gotta give it a try. So as always, I'll leave a dim loadout link to this build down below in the description, and also the pinned comment if you'd like to give it a try. And if you got any buddies who are Titan mains, I'd appreciate if you share the video with them. I'm sure they find it enjoyable. And if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate if you drop a like and a comment, because those things really help out the algorithm and go a long way. And if you are new here, please consider subscribing. Would love to have you here on this journey to 100K. And with that, I'll catch you in the next video. See you later.